Welcome everyone. My name is Molly Keck with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and I'm an entomologist here in Bexar County. And thank you for joining us for our weekly webinar series. This week we're going to be talking about what's happening in your veggie garden with insects. And if you didn't get a chance to watch our horticulturist presentation on what's happening as far as what should be going on with the garden, make sure that you check that out, because that was an excellent presentation with a lot of good information about maintenance and what you should be doing to help make sure that you get plenty of veggies this spring 2020. So if you're starting to notice that you've got certain insects that look like this harlequin bug down at the bottom, or maybe you've got some old cole crops that are in the ground that are just not doing too well, maybe have a whole bunch of holes in them, maybe a little bit wilted, this is not the time of year here in April for those cole crops to still be surviving. So there are some insects that will come in late season and give you an indication that it's really just time to get rid of that crop or that plant. Any cole crops that you have in the ground, if they're not looking good, pull them out. There is probably nothing that you can do and spray on them to get them to be able to produce a better yield, to have a prettier leaf, anything like that. It's just time for those guys to go. It's just too hot for them to survive. So if you're noticing on any of your cole crops that orange and black bug, that's a harlequin bug, and it is absolutely an indication that you have plants in the ground that don't want to be there anymore and really want to die. Another insect that you might be seeing on your older cole crops in your garden are cabbage loopers. Cabbage loopers start out relatively small and then they just kind of get fatter. They aren't huge like maybe a tomato hornworm is, but they like to eat on the outer leaves of any and all cole crops. And when they overwhelm those cole crops, they might move into other crops as well. But if you have any cole crops in the ground, it's time to go ahead and pull those in the spring. If you're dealing with them in the winter time, for any caterpillar that might be feeding on your landscape, BT is a fabulous option. Spinosad is another great option. Both of those are organic. BT is completely host specific to caterpillars. If you get BT worm killer, you are only going to kill caterpillars. However, that does not discriminate against beneficial caterpillars. So if you accidentally get it on your milkweed plants or your parsley, you might kill off your swallowtails or your monarchs as well. Permethrin is another option that you can utilize to try to knock down those cabbage loopers or other caterpillars also. Just kind of a little bit of a recap for you. I would encourage you to recognize when you're dealing with a chewing insect versus a sucking insect, because where you maybe find them, how many you happen to find, when they might be feeding on the plant kind of varies depending on if it chews on the plant tissue or if it sucks the sap out of the plant tissue. So a chewing insect is going to demolish the leaf, right? And then it can't photosynthesize, it can't produce a bloom. And so you certainly want to do something about those guys. In your veggie garden, you're looking at caterpillars, beetles, maybe grasshoppers as we get further into the warmer months, but also it could be snails or slugs. Sucking insects can be a number of different insects. These are usually small insects that are found on the backside of the leaves. And if you're not seeing them on the backside of the leaves, then it might be a larger like stink bug that's coming in and feeding and leaving. But for the most part, they're very small, very soft-bodied, and they're sucking all the juices out of the plant and putting a significant amount of stress sometimes on the plant. So right now, in April of 2020, we're starting to finally warm up, and probably what you have in the ground in your garden, or what most people have in their spring garden, are tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, or other cucurbits. Those are probably in the San Antonio area, maybe your most common types of plants. So if you have tomatoes in the ground, and let's be honest, most people in Texas grow tomatoes because they're relatively easy to grow here, and people just really love to produce these things. Your main pests of tomatoes are a tomato hornworm, a leaf-footed stink bug, and the tomato pinworm. The leaf-footed stink bug starts out as a very small, reddish colored, almost spider-like looking insect with black legs, and they will accumulate and aggregate on the fruit of the tomato, and usually before it's really turned red, they'll do this. When you see them in this form, you don't often recognize that they are going to become that dreaded leaf-footed bug. What we recognize is the adult. We don't always recognize the babies. But what you want to kill are those little tiny babies. So be a good gardener, spend time out there in your garden, identify them and catch them as soon as they start to emerge from those eggs so that you can try to catch them before they really do some major damage on both the leaves and on the fruit. Easy thing that you can do is if all they are is on one tomato, go outside with a cup, fill it with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and just flink that tomato plant and let them all drop dead or drop into the rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol kills them right away. You can try soapy water, but for me, I like the thrill of the kill. I like to know I actually killed them, so I prefer to use rubbing alcohol. If they are all over the plant is larger, you can get more bang for your buck by going out with a big pan, something very wide, maybe a cake pan or a shallow cookie pan or something. Fill it with rubbing alcohol, and then just take a stick or your hand and just bop that plant as hard as you can really quickly and see how many fall into it. You can try to vacuum them out. You can try to hand pick them out. You can do all those things as well. Oftentimes, the shake method or your fingers will kill more of them than most of the products that you can apply. It takes me more time to turn around and go into the garage and get my spray can and spray those guys than it does for me to just smash them as quickly as I can as I see them. As far as using products that maybe have a longer residual, meaning that they last a little bit longer so that when they come back out and feed, or any that you didn't kill, hopefully you'll knock them out. Synthetic pyrethroids work pretty well. Just make sure that they are labeled also for use on tomatoes. Since these guys touch with the tip of their toes and the tip of their mouth, you really want to make sure that you try to apply to them as opposed to just spraying the plant and hoping that they get enough on their body. Now, tomato hornworms are a large caterpillar that will turn into a type of sphinx moth, and they generally eat your tomato plants down. And it's usually when it's about to bloom or you have little green tomatoes and you know you're going to have a really great harvest, you come back out and it's eaten down to just sticks. And when it gets to that point, that plant will never recover to produce enough tomatoes that it's worth you even messing with them. It's almost just time to pull them up. They are controlled through natural enemies most of the time, and they will turn into that moth that you see down there. So if you see those moths around your flowering plants right now, it means that they're probably laying eggs pretty soon, especially if you have tomatoes. And in about a week or two, those eggs will hatch and they will be actively feeding on your tomatoes. So watch very carefully on the tomatoes. See if you see leaves disappearing, looks like blunt sticks sticking up where they fed on it, and that's the time to jump on it. BT and spinosad work fabulous against the tomato hornworm. Indoxacarb and carbaryl are two other options that you have as far as active ingredients, but make sure you purchase a product that is meant for tomatoes. Another thing to do if you have an issue with tomato hornworms over and over again, do some crop rotation. Move that garden bed to the other side. You know, if you have got 4 beds in a row or something like that, move them around, shuffle them around a little bit so that you're not always planting tomatoes in this bed and always planting cucumbers over here. And that will help actually reduce the population somewhat. Hand pick them off too if you can find them. Go outside at night with a black light, and supposedly they illuminate. Something in their exoskeleton allows them to illuminate. So go out there, see if you can find them, and hand pick them off in the middle of the night. You killing one is a sure thing. You know you killed that guy as opposed to spraying your plant and hoping that they consume enough pesticide to get sick. Tomato pinworms you've probably dealt with before, which it's a little tiny caterpillar that will burrow into the fruit of your tomato. They'll start out by doing things like feeding on the leaves, and they'll kind of skeletonize them, and then they'll move into the fruit. And of course, that's rotten. You're not going to consume that. If you were a grower, you were not going to be able to sell this. Prevention is really the key for these guys. And so prevention starts with last season. You should have cleaned up everything that was in the ground. Don't leave tomato plants in the ground to just freeze over the winter time. Pull them up. The end of this season, the end of the summer, as you start to think about your fall garden, pull up those tomato plants. Get them out of there, and that way the pinworms won't be hopefully in the soil. Also go around and massage the soil a little bit, turn it over, and that will help also kill whatever eggs or pupa might be hanging out inside there. So initially you'll notice kind of a skeletonizing. It looks like the leaves become transparent, and then you'll notice the leaves will start to curl. And so just the plant just doesn't look great. And then they start going after the fruit that's able to actually produce. So start with clean plants. start with a clean garden more than anything. If the fruit becomes infested, use it up quickly. Pull it, destroy it, or eat it. Pick around it if you want to. As you start to see the leaves folding over, you've probably waited a little bit too late. They're pretty well protected. Once they're inside the fruit, there's not much you can do about it either. So what you want to do is, as soon as you see that skeletonizing look to your leaves, spinosad and S. valerate are two great options. BT, yes, will work because it is a caterpillar, but you have to get on these guys quicker than usually what BT can provide you as far as control. So for cucurbits, if you're planting cucumbers and you're planting squash, and most of us do during these warm weather months, you're probably dealing with one of three things, if not all three things. You've got cucumber beetles that cause havoc on our cucurbits, squash vine borers, and squash bugs. Cucumber beetles come in three different types. There's the banded on the top left, the top right is the spotted, and the bottom picture is called a striped cucumber beetle. Initially, they start out as leaf feeders, and when their populations are huge, they can really just chew things down to pretty much nubbins. Later on in the season, if they're feeding on the leaves, they are rarely economically significant. But what they might do is scrape on the fruit. They like to overwinter close to the crop that they infested. So if you live somewhere where you have acres of unmanaged land really close by, or just a lot of weeds, or a roadside, something like that, then you can expect that these guys will have these major explosions in population from time to time, because that's the kind of habitat they like to live in. So the damage they do to the leaves is those big holes. They really like young seedlings that come up, but they'll also later on in the season scrape on those cucumbers, melons, they'll do it too as well. It's aesthetically unpleasing, but the fruit is fine for you to eat. And in all honesty, it really tells you that that fruit's ready to pick. You probably should have picked it a couple days ago. It hit the right sugar-water ratio in there, and they could detect that sugar. And that's what made them attracted to scraping on the outside of the fruit. For managing these guys, start out with transplants instead of seeds, and consider, if they are eating down your little leaves to nothing, to pull them and start with a larger plant. Especially with cucumbers, you can always start a little bit later. Your squash, you probably don't have as large of a window to plant things and get a good yield off of them. But if they're eating them down, it's never going to recover. Pull them up. You've gotten rid of a food source, so you've disrupted the life cycle. Now plant some larger transplants that you get from the nursery. You can try floating row covers when you see that they're active, and most of the time they are eating on the tender growth before it's ever bloomed, and so you don't have to worry about not getting your pollinators in there to control them. Try to rotate your crops around again. That's really a good idea to do season after season. Mulch is also something that they don't particularly prefer, and they really like a thicker mulch, so don't use a real fine mulch. So straw mulch is really nice. Reflective plastic, it's very, very tedious to put that down. This is something that somebody in a more larger scale operation would do. But if you have the time and you want to put the effort into it, that can be very helpful. They don't like that reflective plastic. And then carbaryl is really the best option that you have as far as chemical control for trying to manage cucumber beetles. And you can utilize either a dust, or you could utilize a spray on the plant. Now, squash vine borers are one of those that are incredibly irritating, because your plant looks fine and then it's just dead, and there's nothing you can do to bring it back. It's gone. During the mornings, these squash vine borer adults, when there's still kind of some dew and it's a little bit cooler on the plants, that's when you'll probably see them. And that's a good time to go out and monitor for them, or hand pick them off so you can keep them from laying eggs on your plants. When you notice this orange and kind of like a graphite blue colored moth flitting around or resting on your cucurbits, know that within a week or so, you need to put something on those vines to prevent those eggs from hatching and the little caterpillar from chewing into the center of the vine, boring through it and killing the plant. Physical control things that you can try is to put some foil loosely around the vine so that they can't get to it, but I always am very concerned that might insulate too much and cause too much heat. So just kind of be, careful with that. You can try floating row covers when the plant isn't flowering, but unfortunately, when these guys are out is when the plant usually has a couple little buds on it. They can start when the plant is young, like you kind of see in that bottom picture, and they can also do it when the plant is more established. They have multiple generations a year. So there's a really good yellow pan method that you can use for monitoring. Lots of insects are attracted to yellow, but put them around your squash, yellow bowls, and put some soapy water in it. And when they fall in, once you start noticing that you have a bunch of them, then you know it's probably about time that you treated your vines. Now, know that we have multiple generations a year, and you're kind of treating preemptively, right? Because you don't know when those eggs are going to be hatching. So you have multiple options, and it really just depends on what you want to do. If you use BT or spinosad, BT is going to last less than a week as far as the residual goes. Spinosad is going to last you up to a week. So you're going to be applying very, very often if you're using that. You're going to be putting out a lot of pesticide. Carbaryl can give you a week and a half to 2 weeks residual, so a little bit longer. Permethrin and bifenthrin can give you 2 to 4 weeks. Esfenvalerate can give you up to a 4-week residual. So you kind of have to weigh the options. If you prefer to be only organic, know that you're going to apply a lot of pesticide to that plant. If you just really want something that's going to protect the plant a little bit longer, Esfenvalerate is your better option because you don't have to come out and reapply often. If you don't like applying it to the entire plant, apply it along the vines if you can. Spray along the vines, and that way you protect the flowers for your pollinators, and you're only hopefully killing who's chewing through the vine and they die or they're dead before they get to be burrowing up through the leaves. I'm sorry, up through the vine. Squash bugs are another pest of mainly squash plants, but they will also feed on pumpkins and sometimes on melons. So we see them whenever we have any cucurbit that's in the vegetable garden. Initially, the damage that they cause is these yellow flecks on the foliage that might almost look like it's a virus. And then later, though, those yellow flecks will turn brown because the tissue has died. The foliage then will start to wilt, it'll start to die off, and then they start to feed on the fruit. If it gets to that point, you're really not out there in your garden watching it very carefully because these guys will accumulate in large numbers. They're almost always on a squash plant. Just because you find 1 or 2 or even a handful of eggs doesn't mean they're going to kill it. But when you have giant populations allowed to build up, that's when they do cause a lot of damage to your squash. So what I would do is, as the squash is still in a size where you can easily look at every single leaf, turn those leaves over and you will see the eggs there. Once you see the eggs, you know you've got babies starting to feed. It might be time to apply a pesticide or at least monitor better for them. Avoiding mulch is really important because they like to hide at the base of the plant, and if you have thick mulch, then they can hide under those pieces. Use pesticides early on in the season, such as that Esfenvalerate or permethrin or carbaryl, so early on before they are allowed to really explode. And if you don't want to treat the whole entire plant, you can just treat the base of the plant where they congregate. And so as they crawl down and hang out there, then you hope that they encounter enough pesticide that it kills and they encounter it and it makes them sick and they die. Also, make sure that you turn over the soil and destroy all the crop residuals. Don't leave old plants in the ground and let them, just because you don't want to get out there and clean it up because it's really hot and it's July or August. Make sure that you pull that stuff, bag it up in a black trash bag, throw it in the trash can. Don't put it in your compost pile. So some of the other insect pests that we see common to any and all vegetables, you might have, bush beans in the ground right now, snap peas, I don't know, other okra, things like that. You've got other stuff in the ground other than just tomatoes and cucurbits. And so no matter what you have, aphids are always going to probably be an issue for you. Aphids love overcrowded conditions where you've planted things too close together. There's poor air circulation because there's way too many leaves, making high humidity, and or you're overwatering and causing more humidity in the area. They also like to go after plants that are at the end of their season. Plants emit these pheromones, and if they are old and stressed out, they don't have the proper chemicals inside of them to combat sucking and feeding insects. So Plants that are ready to die are telling these insects, come after me and feed on me. I want to be put out of my misery. Aphid damage oftentimes will be kind of a curled or deformed looking leaf because they're feeding on all of the juices inside of the plants. They're very easy to kill. Insecticidal soaps, horticultural oils, anything that's labeled for that plant, even heavy blasts of water will kill aphids. But the thing is, you have to treat on a regular basis because aphids oftentimes, when you have knocked them out, they'll ramp up reproduction to kind of overcompensate for the lack of population that they have. And so you really, if the aphids are a big issue, you want to get on a regimen and you want to treat 2, maybe 3 times, because 1 time is often not going to actually do a very good job. Aphids also will cause some damage to plants if it looks like the plant is otherwise very healthy, but let's say that it's not blooming. Like maybe it's a cucumber and you feel like, man, I should get, or okra is another one. I should get 1 more load of blooms off of this plant before it finally gets put to bed. If you look on the underside of the leaves, oftentimes you might have just enough aphids that it's putting enough stress on the plant that it has no energy left to make a bloom. If you go in with insecticidal soap, oftentimes you'll see 2-3 days later, boom, 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 little blooms are going to pop out everywhere. So if the plant's not yielding what you think it should, but otherwise looks fine, check for aphids, and that might be all that you need to do to get that 1 more harvest out of them. Whiteflies are really common on eggplants and green beans and just really any vegetable that's out there. They have a very broad host range, so they can be on trees and then they can also be on your vegetables. Be diligent with these guys. If you have leaves that you can remove, you can do that. Look for the immatures. I know this is a picture of the adults, but the immatures cannot fly. And so if you can snip those off, then you can help reduce the population on the plant overall. Spray it with sharp blasts of water if the plant can tolerate that. Reflective mulch is something that the adults avoid. And then you can use yellow sticky traps for monitoring. They'll get stuck to it. Yellow sticky traps are just kind of a really cool thing that you can use in the garden just to see what populations are up and down. And they're very similar to aphids in that you want to treat often if you can, treat multiple times, but pretty wimpy of an insect. So soaps and oils, neem oil, will work pretty well against them. Acephate is another one that is labeled for whiteflies that has a little bit longer residual if you are going to go on vacation or you just do not have the time and effort to constantly be out there applying oils or soaps. And then as we get into hotter months, we're not going to see spider mites just yet unless maybe you have a greenhouse. But as it gets hotter and it stays hotter and our temperatures are in the 90s and above, spider mites start to thrive. They love heat, they love the sun, and they prefer the plants that we push through the hot times of the summertime. So peppers and tomatoes and green beans and eggplants and okra, they'll all be susceptible to spider mites coming in. Spider mites are a type of mite, a large mite that you can actually see, but they make a webbing, and so that's why they're called spider mites. They thrive in the hottest times of the year. Dog days of summer is when we see them. Plant washing can be effective against them. Get your hand soapy and wash the plant and the leaves well. Try to smash, what you're doing really is trying to smash eggs and remove the webbing that maybe is protecting them. Cultural things that you can do is decrease the temperature in some way. If you have container gardens, put the container under the patio or in a shade when it's the hottest time of the day. If you're in a greenhouse, increase the airflow. If it's too humid, then they start to ramp up reproduction. Do some additional watering if you can, so that if the soil is cooler, it's going to radiate cooler temperatures onto the plant. These things won't necessarily kill the spider mites, but what they do is they keep them from being happy and making a ton of babies. And so you have a population that is tolerable maybe to that plant. Insecticidal soaps at the summer oil rate, and oils at the summer oil rate can be effective against them, but you have to reapply kind of often. Same thing with whiteflies and aphids. Sulfur products have miticide properties to them. And you can also use marigolds as a good indicator crop. And marigolds have more options. So you can draw them to the marigolds, and when they've loaded those up, then you nuke the heck out of it. And that way, hopefully they never make it into your vegetable garden. But also you know that when they're ramped up on those marigolds, start looking at your other plants pretty regularly. One thing I would just mention about pesticides for spider mites is that you want to use a miticide. So make sure on the label it indicates that it controls mites in some way. An insecticide kills an insect. Miticides kill mites. And not both are not necessarily created equal. So even though you can find products that maybe have the proper active ingredient, if it's not in the miticide formulation, then it probably won't kill your mites. So I hear a lot of people that have issues with controlling spider mites. I'm using the right active ingredient. I never can knock them down. Try to use something that is actually a miticide. And then just to touch again really quickly on caterpillar damage. Caterpillars in the springtime are everywhere. It's the perfect time of year for them to reproduce and be very, very numerous. And while there are some insects that are very host specific to certain plants, there are other caterpillars that don't care what they feed on. So currently in April 2020, I'm seeing buck moths on plants. I'm seeing woolly bears feeding on all sorts of plants, and I'm even getting pictures of people sending me tussock moths on their vegetable plants. So there are some insects that don't care. They don't discriminate. If you are seeing caterpillar damage when it's a little cooler, so earlier in the morning and then later on in the afternoon or really into the evening is when you'll see those guys chomping on the plants. And it's amazing. You can easily walk past and not realize it because they're so quiet and still. But if you see caterpillar damage, it really doesn't matter what the caterpillar is. BT works fabulous. Spinosad works quicker and faster, or hand pick them off if you can. I will always recommend BT or Spinosad over other things if you've got caterpillars because they're an excellent choice for controlling caterpillars and they're an organic option too, so they're better for the environment. They break down quicker, but don't ever apply them first thing in the morning. Try to apply in the evening so that you have a longer residual. Some of the non-chemical control measures you can use, and I would highly recommend in your garden, are control the weeds. There are so many insects that utilize weeds as part of either where they find harborage at night to hang out, where they like to mate, where they prefer to lay their eggs. And mainly that's it. It's a place that they go to hide. And if you don't have that good hiding place, they're going to go somewhere else. So certainly control the weeds, but also take that into consideration if you have weeds right adjacent to your garden. If that is always going to be an issue and you have no control over that, you need to recognize that you're always probably going to have an insect problem in that vegetable garden. Trellises are also very important. If you have anything that likes to grow in a vine, allow it to grow up a trellis, or if you don't like it, if it's too heavy, maybe to grow up, have a horizontal trellis so it at least is growing above the soil. Less contact with the soil, less contact with other insects. And then blasts of water. Spray the plant. You know, it's not always a good thing to do that when it's super duper hot. It might burn your leaves, but just know that if you can give a good little spray to your plants, if it's a good blast of water, it can bust up aphids, it can pop off wings, it can damage things enough that it can keep populations low a lot of times. And you can do that every time you water. And then just a word about your pollinators. You know, be smart when you're applying pesticides to your veggie plants. You need those pollinators to pollinate those plants so that you will get fruit from it. And so what you don't want to do is kill off all of your pollinators. The best time to treat is in the evening when the pollinators have gone off to bed. If you find a butterfly or a bee on your plant, don't put out a pesticide. I mean, that's the simplest thing that you can think of. And remember that insecticides kill insects and they do not discriminate against good guys and bad guys. Your pollinators will die from them. If you go out there and you spray, even with its neem oil, insecticidal soap, anything that is organic even will kill your pollinators. So whatever it is that you use, try to use it in the evening and when the pollinators are not active. And if you're super duper concerned, try to get yourself like a big mat of tulle fabric, mesh fabric. Spray it and then cover it. That way the pollinators don't come in and encounter it. Worst thing that could happen is that this pollinator lives but makes it back into the colony, and that bumblebee or that honeybee touches hundreds of others in the colony and you've killed a chunk of that nest. Best case scenario is it drops dead right there. Also, a lot of our solitary pollinators, there's just one of them. So when you kill that one, you've killed a mother that was potentially laying a bunch of eggs. You want those pollinators to thrive and survive because your vegetable gardens rely on them. Well, thank you very much for joining me this week on our weekly webinar series. Again, we covered vegetable pests this week. Make sure that you check out this webinar and all of the others that we have on My Extension 210, our YouTube channel. And you can also check it out on our website, bear-tx.tamu.edu. For more information about upcoming seminars, make sure that you check out our website so that you can see the list of everything that we're providing May through all the way through May live, but also everything will be posted online. So once again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you logging on and watching these webinar series with us. If you have questions about insects, be sure to reach out to me. Again, my name is Molly Keck. I'm an entomologist with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in Bexar County. And you're always welcome to shoot me an email, send me a picture, and I can do my best to try to help you figure out what bugs are bugging you.